What if I told you that beneath layers of government secrecy, something has been unearthed? Something ancient, intelligent, and far beyond anything we could ever explain. Not just a threat, not just a creature, but a presence, alive, aware, and waiting. In this video, you're not just going to hear a story, you're going to feel it. A CDC scientist is pulled from his life into the heart of a classified crisis. 12 people are found dead in the remote Canadian wilderness, their bodies mutilated, with impossible precision. Surveillance picks up thermal anomalies, strange electromagnetic fields, and footprints that don't match any known species. But what's worse are the whispers. Voices no one can understand, but everyone can feel. What they discovered in that cave wasn't an animal. It was something born of indigenous folklore, tied to the darkest truths of the Wendigo mythology, but rendered horrifyingly real through biological evidence that defies all logic. A humanoid entity with parasites in its blood, a mind behind its eyes, and a message it doesn't speak, but transmits. This isn't fiction. It's a confrontation with the unknown, and you are part of it now. But before we go any further, I need to ask you something. Don't just watch. Become part of this. Because if this story found its way to you, it's probably not by accident. Most people who watch this channel aren't subscribed. But what we share here isn't just information. It's revelation. It's what slips through when the veil between worlds gets too thin. So please subscribe now to The Other Side Speaks. Click the bell, turn on all notifications. Not because I said so, but because this is only the beginning. There are things you need to hear, things you've already started to remember. If you've ever dreamed of a place that doesn't exist, if you've ever felt someone watching when no one was there, if you've ever missed something you can't name, then this is your call. Stay with me until the final second, because what you're about to see was never meant to be contained. There are nights when something ancient stirs beneath the surface of what we call reality. That night, for Dr. William Thorne, wasn't just a call, it was a rupture. The urgent knock on his apartment door came at 3:07 a.m., the kind of knock that's too calm to be safe. A government agent, face unreadable, handed him a folder with 3 words stamped in red. Biological threat level black. No explanation. No hesitation. The moment he opened it, he recognized the coding, classified far beyond CDC level clearance. Still, he was expected to respond. As he packed his cold weather gear, William felt a sinking in his chest. He'd been stationed across the globe, from Congo's viral zones to Siberia's frozen pandemics. But this was different. There were no viral strains here, only carnage. The preliminary reports spoke for themselves. 12 deaths, each more disturbing than the last, all within a span of 6 weeks, and all sharing the same chilling detail: selective mutilation, as if someone or something was harvesting very specific pieces of the human body. Inside the military-grade helicopter, blades thrumming above the howling wind, Dr. Thorne sat alone, reviewing the files for the 3rd time. Not a single clue suggested any known parasitic organism, no signs of toxin exposure, no wildlife signatures. But there were surgical patterns in the mutilations: quadriceps flayed, livers removed, cleanly, spines untouched. Whatever had done this was choosing, not tearing. And that kind of precision doesn't belong to hunger. It belongs to design. The flight path carved a lonely trail above the vast remote Canadian wilderness, heading deep into the Greenstone Belt, a region riddled with ancient geological scars and folklore darker than the pine forests below. Thorne glanced out the window. Snow spiraled over the endless white, and somewhere in the folds of that silence, something watched. He didn't know why he felt it, but he did, as if the wilderness itself knew he was coming. They said this was an unknown predator, but predators leave tracks. Predators get caught. This one hadn't been seen, only felt. One ranger described it before dying. He said the air went quiet, and something whispered without sound. Another victim had claw marks that entered from the front, but no defensive wounds. She hadn't fought. She hadn't had the time. Somewhere, just below the numbers and photos, Dr. Thorne began to sense a psychological horror brewing, one that didn't just break the flesh but the rules, something that watched from between the branches, or beneath the snow, or behind the mirror of understanding. He scribbled a note on the margin of the page, sentience pattern territory, and then he saw it, buried in the pathology report of victim 6, trace amounts of electromagnetic disruption around the neural tissue. That shouldn't be possible. The bodies weren't near any generators, unless whatever did this gave off its own field. That would explain the thermal imaging anomalies reported by the recovery team. The pilot's voice crackled in through his headset. Dr. Thorne, we'll be descending near the staging camp. As they lowered into the icy desolation, William clenched the file in his gloved hands. A secret government lab had been built here, long ago, hidden behind layers of redacted maps and forgotten names. They were calling it a classified facility, but to him, it felt more like a tomb waiting to be opened. The moment Dr. Thorne stepped onto the frozen ground, the silence felt engineered. Not just natural quiet, but suppressed, like the world itself was holding its breath. The snow crunched beneath his boots, too loud in contrast. Every step echoed off unseen walls. Soldiers stood at the perimeter, eyes twitching, fingers close to their triggers. Their presence didn't inspire safety. It confirmed fear. He was greeted by Commander Reese. Walker. Special ops, no nonsense. Tall, lean, eyes like flint. He didn't shake hands, just handed William a tablet and gestured toward the tents. "You're late," he said. No smile, just the wind between them, and a low-frequency hum coming from somewhere underground. An electromagnetic field generator, Thorne guessed, meant to keep something in, not out. Inside the main tent, scientific instruments buzzed. The air was sharp with chemicals, damp canvas, and something else. Metallic, blood and ozone. On the central table, 3D reconstructions of attack sites floated above holographic surfaces. Thorne studied the patterns. All deaths formed a near-perfect geometric ring around the northern edge of Lake Superior. And in the center, nothing but granite cliffs and ice. He was shown photos of footprints, massive and deformed, humanoid, but not human. 4 toes, one slightly askew, and the depth, at least 46 centimeters long. That wasn't a bear. That wasn't anything in the indigenous folklore he had ever come across. But Reese said the locals had a name for it, a name spoken only in whispers with fear wrapped around every syllable. And that name chilled Thorne more than the wind. The Ojibwa elders, when approached by the military, had given no direct answers, but one whispered, "You've awakened the Wendigo." William had read about Wendigo mythology during his time studying ritualistic psychosis. He had always assumed it was metaphor, representing greed, isolation, starvation. But now, the parallels with the current mutilations were too precise to ignore. The victims' remains weren't just mutilated, they were curated. Muscles separated from bone, internal organs missing without damage to the surrounding tissue, and all of it left in place, as if to be found, as if to send a message or a warning. He noticed something else. The camp had a coldness that wasn't just physical. Some of the staff were jumpy, flinching at shadows, refusing to sleep near the woods. One medic had scratched the inside of his tent wall over and over the same phrase, "It watches when I close my eyes." And his eyes were bloodshot, unfocused. He kept repeating that he could hear the trees breathe. In the corner of the lab, William found a jar. Inside it, preserved tissue. Dark gray, sinewy, and pulsing faintly under UV light. A tag read, "Biological Anomaly, Mover 147B. They'd found it clinging to a victim's spine. Not part of them. Something else. Something symbiotic. He looked at Reese. "What is this?" But Reese only said, "It's not alone out there. That's just the beginning." And in that moment, William understood. This wasn't a predator they were hunting. It was a humanoid entity hunting them back. Quietly, patiently, intentionally. When Dr. Thorne stepped out of the armored vehicle and into the base, he didn't just enter a military operation. He walked into something that felt deeply unnatural. The cold here wasn't just physical. It vibrated beneath the skin, humming just under the heartbeat. Set against the vast, frozen edge of Lake Superior, the classified facility was a strange union of high-tech fear and primitive survival. There were no signs marking the entrance, just floodlights cutting through the mist, and the constant low thrum of electromagnetic field generators buried under snow and ice. The base had been hastily constructed, but it didn't feel temporary. Multiple tents were lined up with surgical precision, and inside them, scientists in biohazard suits moved like ghosts. There was an urgency to their stillness, like even movement had to be calculated here. William passed by rows of thermal imaging monitors, each tracking heat signatures from the forest line, but none of them showed anything alive. Only shadows, shapes, movement where nothing should move. Commander Reese Walker led him deeper into the camp, into a reinforced tent that functioned as the operations center. Maps were pinned on every wall, digital overlays blinking red across the northern perimeter. Whatever it is, Reese said, it's not staying in one place, but it's not running either. It circles. On one map, Thorne saw something eerie. Attack sites forming a pattern. A biological threat operating not on instinct, but on design. Then came the images. Photos taken from drones, hikers' last known selfies, blurry stills from motion sensor cameras. In several, you could see just behind the subjects. Something wrong. A shadow misaligned with the light. Branches bent the wrong way. In one image, a man smiling at the camera. In the reflection of his glasses, something towering stood behind him. A humanoid entity, distorted, barely visible. But there, outside, the team showed William footprints found near the most recent victim. Elongated, almost skeletal, with claw-like impressions instead of toes. Each one sunk impossibly deep into the ice, more pressure than a bear or moose could ever produce. As William knelt to examine them, he noticed something that made his blood go still. The claws had scraped something into the frozen earth. Not letters, not language, but symbols, symmetrical, deliberate. All around the camp, guards rotated in strict formation. They were heavily armed, not with traditional weapons but containment-grade tranquilizers, devices more often used on biological anomalies that defy normal classification. Thorne asked one of the tech officers what exactly they were expecting. She answered with a shrug and a whisper, "It's not about what we expect, it's about what already happened." An unmarked trailer housed what little remained from the first recon team. Shredded gear, bent metal, a helmet cracked in the middle with scorch marks around the edges. Not fire, not acid. Something else. Electromagnetic exposure, maybe, but stronger than any natural source. They'd been torn apart from the inside. Their communications scrambled mid-transmission. One message barely came through. "It's watching us. We're inside. It's ground." A biologist at the camp named Dr. Eliza Harrington showed Thorne a preserved claw fragment recovered from a tree trunk. It had punctured through 5 inches of bark, effortlessly. "It doesn't hunt randomly," she said. "It chooses, and it always comes back to the same circle." That phrase haunted Thorne more than any data. It comes back, not for food, not for shelter, but as if the forest belonged to it, and every intrusion was a trespass in a territory ruled by something no longer animal, but not quite divine either. At the edge of the camp, a ring of trees stood twisted, bent unnaturally outward, as if something had erupted from the center. The snow around them refused to settle, as though repelled by an unseen force. The military had flagged it as a biological anomaly, but it looked more like a scar. Dr. Thorne stood there a long time, feeling a pressure behind his eyes. Not pain, exactly. A presence, as if something just beneath the frost was waiting to exhale. Back in the analysis tent, William was shown heat maps tracking thermal imaging over time. Each showed the same thing, a moving shape that never crossed into view, always just beyond the tree line. One analyst remarked, "It knows where the cameras are." Not a guess, a certainty. Whatever this was, it avoided detection with eerie precision, always staying just out of reach, but never too far. Eliza revealed another detail. Across several incidents, CDC scientists examining the remains had noticed slight variations in internal tissue, subtle but impossible to ignore. Some of the victims' organs showed signs of being partially replaced or infected by an unknown parasitic organism. It wasn't decaying them. It was preserving something, adapting them maybe, as if the creature wasn't just feeding, but changing what it touched. More disturbing still was the classified facility log recovered from a now-abandoned underground station 30 miles east. Years ago, it had been an experimental research base, focused on fringe virology and synthetic biology. The log mentioned Project Montessera, a failed containment involving a cryptid discovery linked to ancient indigenous folklore. The files had been buried, but now, the pattern had returned. The same mutilation, the same zone, the same signs. Thorne couldn't shake the thought that what they were seeing now wasn't the beginning of something. It was the return of something. Something that had once been silenced, but never destroyed. The supernatural. Whispers reported by the locals weren't hallucinations. They were warnings. And someone, somewhere, had ignored them. He sat with Reese that night, just outside the command tent, drinking bitter coffee while the wind cut through their coats. The stars were too bright, too still. "You think this is all just nature gone wrong?" Thorne asked. Reese looked at him, jaw tight. "No. I think we touched something that didn't want to be found. And now it wants to see who's brave or stupid enough to keep looking." Later, just before turning in, Thorne heard it. A sound so subtle he almost dismissed it. But it wasn't the wind. It was too deliberate. Like a voice swallowed by distance and time. Supernatural whispers, barely audible, moving like smoke through the trees. And somehow, impossibly, one word seemed to surface from the layers of noise. Leave. That night, 2 soldiers vanished from the north perimeter. No alarms were triggered. No struggle. Only their rifles found, frozen into the ground, pointing in opposite directions. The forest remained silent, but not still. Something was out there, watching. Not for weakness, not for threat, just remembering who had dared come back. There's a silence that doesn't belong to nature. It lingers after the wind dies, after the trees stop swaying, after even your heartbeat feels too loud. It was in that silence that Dr. William Thorne found himself, seated across from an elder named Joseph Whitefeather, inside a modest wooden cabin, just outside the secured perimeter. The old man didn't speak right away. He only watched William with eyes full of centuries, eyes that had already seen too much. Whitefeather was one of the few remaining voices from a lineage that remembered things the rest of the world had chosen to forget. He didn't fear the forest like the soldiers did. He pitied it. When Thorne asked if he believed the attacks were from a biological anomaly, the elder smiled, sadly. "You came here for science," he said, softly. "But what you'll find was never meant to be named." And then he said it. Wendigo. It wasn't just a word. It was a wound, spoken low, as if saying it louder would awaken something. Whitefeather described a humanoid entity, starved beyond death, hollowed by hunger that no flesh could fill. He didn't speak of it as a myth, but as a consequence. When the land is disrespected, when the spirits are disturbed, it returns. You don't find it. It chooses you. Back at the base, Thorne dug into archived folklore he'd once studied during his academic years, texts he had long dismissed as ritualistic metaphor. The Wendigo mythology was consistent across tribes, an ancient creature, once human, transformed by acts of desperation, cannibalism, or spiritual transgression. What struck him now wasn't just the tale, but the alignment with what they were seeing: selective mutilations, eerie silence, supernatural whispers, and impossible physical traits. One text described how the Wendigo marked its territory not with scent or tracks, but with absence. Whole areas would fall into unnatural quiet. Animals would avoid them. Snow wouldn't settle. Fires wouldn't burn right. And those who entered reported hallucinations, dread or dreams that didn't feel like their own. It sounded like folklore, but William had already seen these effects firsthand at the edges of the classified facility. Eliza Harrington returned from the field with new samples, tree bark scarred with symmetrical marks, unlike claw swipes or tool impressions. When analyzed under magnification, they revealed traces of biological residue, including a protein structure with no known match in existing databases. "It's like language," she whispered. "A biological one, written by something old." Then came the recordings. Audio captured by surveillance units placed deep in the forest. Hours of static, branches cracking, wind. But around 3:17 a.m. each night, a low-frequency hum would begin. Then voices. Or something like them. Not speech, not music, just intent. Words that bypassed the ears and struck the nerves. Reese demanded it be scrubbed from official records, but William copied a segment. And when he listened to it alone that night, he wept without knowing why. Because somewhere inside him, buried beneath years of science, data, and rational thought, something remembered. Not from his life, but from something older. A collective wound. A whisper from the other side of the mirror. And in that moment, Dr. Thorne no longer asked what the creature was. He asked what part of humanity had been left behind to become it. The deeper they dug into the pattern, the more it felt like a reawakening rather than an emergence. Old maps revealed strange notations, X marks drawn centuries ago by fur trappers, symbols etched along fault lines that overlapped perfectly with the attack zones. These weren't coincidences. They were seals, broken now, and what lay beneath them wasn't asleep. It was patient. In the lower chambers of the underground base, a sealed file was recovered from the abandoned wing of the lab, Project North Night. It referred to a cryptid discovery unearthed decades ago in the very same region. The organism described shared traits with the current threat: elongated limbs, impossibly light but resilient skeletal structure, and signs of symbiotic parasitic organisms within its bloodstream. But that specimen had been destroyed, or so they thought. Thorne became obsessed. He began sketching it even without clear images, just from dreams that weren't his. He saw the remote Canadian wilderness under different stars, with voices in the fog calling names he didn't recognize. One night he woke to find dirt under his nails, despite never leaving the lab. Another night he found a drawing in his notebook, his own hand, but not his style. It showed a circle of trees, and in the center, something watching. He stopped asking who the creature was. Instead, he began asking what it remembered. If this was a remnant of some prehistoric predator, how did it possess intelligence? If it was spiritual, why did it leave behind tissue? Eliza suggested it might be both. A biological host for a non-biological entity. Not a ghost, not a beast. Something that crossed boundaries we no longer understand. The base grew tense. People started hearing things at night. A guard abandoned post claiming he heard his dead wife calling from the forest. Another scientist went mute for 3 days, staring at the snow until her lips cracked. William tried to comfort her, but she whispered one phrase before passing out. "It knows who I am now." And that night, he saw a figure standing motionless at the tree line, not approaching, just waiting. An old handwritten note from Project North Night mentioned a phrase in Latin, "In lucem ex tenebris, sed non sine cicatrices," into the light from darkness, but not without scars. That note was found buried beneath a specimen case. The specimen was gone. The steel box had been warped from the inside out, like something had unlearned the laws that built it. By the time Reese authorized the deeper scan of the forest, it was too late. The thermal imaging showed it had already moved, twice around the perimeter, watching every step they made. The hum returned, now pulsing through the ground itself, and William began to feel that they weren't studying a biological threat anymore. They were trespassing on memory. Something sacred, something cursed. He looked again at Whitefeather's final words before he left. "You can't kill hunger. You can only starve with it, or feed it." And Thorne knew then that the creature wasn't hunting for sustenance. It was hunting for connection, for recognition. And in that moment, he couldn't help but wonder, what if this thing wasn't here to destroy humanity? What if it was trying to show us what we've already become? It started with a flicker, just a dot of heat on the thermal. Imaging grid, faint and pulsing, like a heartbeat buried in stone. At first, the analysts thought it was a system error, a residual echo, but the pattern repeated. Same time, same spot. 24 kilometers northeast of the base, buried beneath layers of ice and granite, a region marked on old geological charts as unstable, fractured by time, but on newer maps, it wasn't marked at all. Dr. William Thorne stared at the screen, something deep inside him already knowing. That warmth, out there, in the cold, wasn't mechanical. It wasn't an animal. It was waiting. The unknown predator hadn't been roaming. It had been returning, always circling back to a central point. Reese ordered the team to prepare. The terrain was treacherous, the wind sharp as glass. Still, they moved, guided by coordinates, pulled by the sense that something unspeakable had been hiding in plain sight. They reached the site at dawn. A cliff face, jagged and dark, rose from the snow like the spine of a buried god. At its base, a narrow fissure split the rock, barely visible unless you knew where to look. Around the entrance, bones, dozens of them, stripped clean, stacked, arranged, not by chance, by intention, like offerings or warnings. Some still had sinew attached, as if devoured recently. The snow around them was undisturbed, no tracks, just the sense that something ancient had moved without moving. William hesitated. There was a hum in the air, low, subsonic, the kind you feel in your teeth. They geared. Up body armor, containment, great equipment, tranquilizers, breathing masks. Eliza clutched a sensor calibrated for electromagnetic fields. "If this thing's alive," she muttered, "it's generating interference." And it was. The closer they got, the more their gear failed. Lights flickered, radios hissed. One by one, they began losing signal. The cave was colder than the surface, but the walls radiated a strange warmth. Smooth stone, darkened by moisture, bore grooves and indentations. Symbols, carved by time or claws or something between the two. Inside, the air was thick, heavy. The silence pressed against their skulls. No insects, no echo. Just the steady drip of condensation and the crunch of boots over gravel older than civilization. As they advanced, the cave narrowed, then opened into a chamber, vaulted, circular, impossible in scale. It shouldn't have existed, yet here it was, and in its center, shrouded in shadow, a form, nearly 3 meters tall, still, watching, not breathing, but aware. Its skin was gray, almost translucent, veins glowing faintly under the surface like buried wires. Its limbs hung low, unnatural and serene. Eyes yellow, slitted, intelligent, not wild, calculated. The team froze, not by command, but by something else. A psychological horror that didn't strike from outside but bloomed within. William didn't feel fear in the traditional sense. He felt recognition. He had seen this in dreams, in glyphs, in the reflection of things we're not meant to see. Reese raised a weapon, but the creature made no move. It simply tilted its head, a gesture both human and wrong, not threatening, almost curious. No one spoke. No one dared. Eliza activated the scanner. Readings went off scale. DNA signatures were unreadable. Radio silence. The creature blinked once, slowly, and that was all. It didn't attack. It didn't flee. It let them see it, let them capture it, as if surrendering was part of something larger. A plan not yet spoken. A message not yet understood. The operation to extract the creature began in silence, not out of protocol, but reverence. No one said it aloud, but they all felt it. This wasn't just a biological anomaly. It was a presence, an idea clothed in flesh. The team wrapped it in reinforced restraints. Sedatives pumped through multiple lines, but even sedated it watched, its eyes half-lidded, but aware, as if sedated only in body, not in mind. As they pulled it from the cavern, the wind died, completely. Birds vanished. Even the snowflakes hovered mid-air for a breath longer than nature allows. William looked back once at the cavern's mouth. The bones no longer looked like trophies. They looked like sentinels, guards who had failed to contain something they once worshipped, or feared, or both. And in that moment he wondered if closing the cave would matter, if it had ever been about the cave at all. The drive back to the base was quiet, too quiet. The hum followed them, subtle vibrations, through the wheels, the air, the bones. Thorne stared at the creature strapped inside its containment shell. Its skin shimmered faintly in the dim lights, like heat waves on a mirage. The further they got from the cave, the more it seemed to glow. Not brighter, but heavier, denser. Like it was becoming more real the more distance they put between it and its source. Eliza whispered from the front seat, barely audible. "I think it wanted to leave." No one responded, but the idea lingered. What if this wasn't a hunt? What if it had been waiting for us, choosing us, luring us to take it, and now by bringing it back they had broken containment not by error, but by design. Back at the base, the generator systems faltered again. Lights flickered, screens glitched. In the camera feed, the creature had not moved, but when William looked at the live monitor, something was different. A shadow behind its eyes, not a reflection, a shape, like something else inside, something layered, parasite, host, or something that blurred both concepts, a fusion beyond human biology. The soldiers who carried the creature began reporting nausea, migraines, bursts of anger. 2 of them quit the mission altogether. One attempted to destroy the sample container, screaming it was whispering at him from inside. The air around the creature vibrated, not in sound, but in pressure, like being too close to a thunderstorm. Without the storm, William reviewed the thermal imaging from the cavern one last day. Time. There was something else, barely visible. A secondary signature behind the main heat source, like a second entity, or maybe the same one, expressed differently. The cave hadn't housed a creature. It had hosted a threshold, and now, that threshold had crossed into their world, not as an invader, not as prey, but as an ambassador of something older than time, cloaked in biology, but forged in myth. Thorne closed his journal that night with trembling hands, and he wrote only this: "It let us find it, but for what purpose?" The transport vehicle was built for war zones, reinforced steel, airlocked interior, temperature-controlled, vibration-dampened, the kind of machine you use to carry unstable pathogens or monsters. But no one inside that convoy spoke. No one celebrated the successful capture, because somewhere deep inside they all knew. It wasn't over. It had just shifted form. Dr. William Thorne sat toward the back, close to the biometric scanner. From the outside, the creature appeared inert, motionless, strapped down. But William could feel something shifting like static against the skin. His fingertips tingled whenever he got too close to the sealed capsule. And the readings were inconsistent. Not flat, not active, but rhythmic. As if sinking. Like it was watching without eyes, moving without motion. Then it began. A low murmur, barely audible, more like a breath. A vibration against the metal walls. One of the soldiers tilted his head and said, "Did someone just say something?" But no one had spoken. They checked the intercom, dead. The frequency wasn't from their radios. It was coming from inside the containment unit. The whispers were not in English, not in any language at all. Linguists would later call it acoustically structured nonsense. But to Thorne, it felt closer to a prayer, or a memory. One soldier, Ramirez, vomited unexpectedly. He looked pale, disoriented. "I felt like my ears were underwater," he said. Like the words weren't meant for us. Another sat in silence, gripping his rifle, pupils dilated. No fever, no infection, but something unseen was pressing in. Eliza called it cognitive static, but no one had a term for what it really was. Psychological horror leaking into the mind, molecule by molecule. The onboard diagnostics began to fail. Monitors blinked out. GPS scrambled. The electromagnetic shielding surged, then dropped. Sparks burst from the rear panel, though no power surges were recorded. It wasn't external interference. It was proximity. The closer they were to the creature, the less the laws of physics seemed to obey. Something in its presence disrupted function, not just mechanical but human. Reese tried to contact the base. Static. Then a sharp tone, high, sharp, like metal screaming. He pulled off his headset, blood trickling from one ear. "It's jamming us," he muttered. But Thorne wasn't so sure. He thought, no, he felt, that it wasn't trying to block communication. It was trying to, speak through it. like the creature was using the systems to translate itself. A moment later, something even more unsettling happened. The creature's lips moved. No sound, no breath, just a soft motion, like it was reciting something internally. Thorn leaned forward instinctively, mesmerized. The creature didn't look at him, but he felt looked at. Not like a subject under study, more like an open book being read aloud. His hands trembled. He couldn't remember his father's voice, or the face of his grandmother. Something was replacing his memories with impressions, as if his mind were being rewritten. At that moment, Eliza screamed. The creature's restraints hadn't moved, but the air shimmered around it. Light bent, just slightly, like heat rising from asphalt but colder. They stopped the vehicle, regrouped, scanned for chemical agents. Nothing. But the damage was done. Something had been unleashed inside that truck. Not claws, not teeth. Something far worse. A presence. And once it touched you, it didn't leave. Outside the vehicle, the world had shifted in subtle ways. The snow was falling sideways, defying gravity. A compass spun aimlessly. Eliza's voice had dropped by half an octave. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. And yet, no one else did, except Thorn. He heard supernatural whispers behind her voice, layered, like overlapping radio transmissions on an empty frequency. The soldiers, once stone-faced professionals, began to falter. One mumbled to himself. Another walked in slow circles, as if lost in a place that didn't exist. Thorn noted something terrifying in his field log. Perceptual interference. No. Influence. Directed. The creature, though still unconscious, seemed to reach into them, like a signal, not overt, not physical, but precise, targeted. It wasn't acting. It was exploring. Reese gave the order to sedate it again. Double dosage. 2 tubes of paralytic pumped into its bloodstream. But the biometric reader didn't change. Pulse, pressure, everything remained steady, almost indifferent. Thorn felt a chill move down his spine as he watched the creature's chest rise once, slowly. And when it exhaled, the inside of the truck fogged instantly. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in under 3 seconds. Then came the whisper again, clearer, inside their minds. Not external, not audio. It said nothing any of them could understand, yet it felt familiar, like an emotion remembered from childhood nightmares, like standing at the edge of a cliff in a dream and realizing you're falling before you've even moved. Indigenous folklore warned of this, not the creature itself, but its echo, the biological residue left in the air, the earth, the mind. Thorn dared to approach the unit. His breath fogged the glass. On the other side, the creature's eyes opened, slowly, yellow, hollow, ancient, and yet aware. It didn't blink, didn't flinch, but in that stillness Thorn saw something human. Not mercy, not fear, but curiosity, as if asking silently, "Why did you come?" And he didn't know the answer. As they resumed transport, the GPS rerouted on its own. They hadn't touched it, but the system recalibrated, guiding them to the underground base, miles away from the intended site. "It's choosing the route," Eliza whispered. "It's taking us somewhere." And the worst part? No one stopped it. The presence within the truck was no longer isolated. The men began experiencing overlapping dreams, of underground tunnels, of voices, speaking in reverse of experimental research long buried. Thorn dreamt of himself dissecting something that looked like the creature, only to realize in the mirror it was himself on the table. The dreams smelled of copper and ash. They stayed with him long after waking. By the time they arrived at the base, something fundamental had shifted. The air was heavier. The creature remained still, but its influence had already spread. They didn't bring it into the world. It allowed itself to enter. And as the doors opened, William Thorn knew containment had failed the moment they touched it. The entrance to the underground base looked like nothing more than a rocky outcrop, just another formation in a vast expanse of forgotten wilderness. But behind the steel-reinforced hatch was something very different, a secret structure hidden beneath 30 meters of ancient bedrock, surrounded by electromagnetic shielding and climate-controlled corridors. It had no official name. Internally, it was known only as Vault 9, but those who worked there whispered something else. The hollow core. The corridor was narrow, dimly lit. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering as if disturbed by more than age. Every footstep echoed too long, and the cold here was different. Drier, heavier. It stuck to your lungs. Dr. William Thorne walked with Reese and Eliza in silence. None of them dared speak. The closer they got to Containment Cell 7, the more the hum returned. Not the generator. Not machinery. It was the same subsonic frequency they'd first heard in the transport. A frequency that made your teeth itch and your thoughts stray. The cell itself was a masterpiece of over-engineering. Triple-sealed titanium walls, electromagnetic dampeners on all sides, atmospheric regulators monitoring oxygen and carbon density to the decimal. Nothing organic could survive escape. Nothing inorganic could transmit out. But as Thorne would later write, we weren't locking it in. We were locking ourselves out. Inside, under harsh white lights, stood the creature, not restrained, not sedated, just standing, still, and watching, always watching. Its yellow eyes moved slowly from person to person, never blinking, never faltering. One technician passed out without warning. Another dropped a glass vial as he stared too long. It looks through the glass, someone said, like it sees you even when it doesn't move. Every second in that room felt stretched. Time slowed. Skin prickled. Thorne stepped forward to observe through the observation barrier, 2 inches of reinforced glass. And as he moved, the creature tilted its head, gently, with eerie precision. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something passed between them. Not a message, not a thought, a realization. You're not here to study me, I'm here to study you. The creature began to whisper again. No mouth movement, no vibration, just a sound in the air, low and impossible to locate. The words, if they were words, carried no linguistic root. Linguists brought in by satellite feed couldn't identify any structure, no syntax, no culture. And yet, everyone who heard it felt something. Some described memories they never lived. Others described guilt or hunger. One simply cried for hours without knowing why. Eliza suggested the sound might be bypassing the auditory system entirely, entering directly through the brain's limbic network. Emotional centers, fear, love, grief. William noted, it doesn't speak to us. It speaks as us. The lab's AI couldn't transcribe the whispers, but it recorded strange feedback, oscillations matching the natural resonance of the chamber. It was as if the room itself was being tuned like an instrument. To what end, no one knew. The more time passed, the more the creature's presence altered the environment. Digital clocks ticked backwards. Water in sealed containers froze despite stable temperature. Light itself bent subtly when the creature moved. Instruments showed an increase in local electromagnetic activity, again not emitted but induced. Whatever this was, it wasn't just physical. It was conceptual, a biological anomaly that bent perception, not by deception, but by redesign. Later that evening, Dr. Thorne returned to the observation deck alone. He watched the creature in silence, journal in hand. It stood as it had for hours, motionless, yet alive. Then, slowly, it turned its gaze directly to him. Its eyes locked onto his, and once again, that presence washed over. Him. Cold, familiar, ancient. The whispers returned, but this time, they carried form, not words, meanings. He felt the remote Canadian wilderness, felt the hunger of the earth, the longing of something buried too long. He clutched the railing as images flooded his mind. Visions of humans twisted by need, by cold, by time. Sacrifices made beneath stone. Rituals whispered into the dark. Parasitic organisms that didn't consume, but merged. He saw the creature as it once was, or maybe as it would. Human, then not. The transformation wasn't physical, it was spiritual. Like something ancient had chosen to live again inside something new. When Eliza joined him, she handed him a report. Samples of the creature's tissue had shown a remarkable trait: symbiotic mutation. human-like DNA interwoven with sequences that had no terrestrial origin. Some believed it was alien, others believed it was synthetic, but William suspected a third answer, that this wasn't from somewhere else. It had always been here, just hidden. Like the Wendigo mythology, not a myth but a veil. The tissue samples also revealed a neural mesh, almost like a distributed brain. It didn't need a central nervous system. It was conscious in every cell, and every cell was listening, learning, changing. William whispered almost reverently, "It doesn't just evolve, it observes until it becomes." The lab began to show signs of stress. Lights dimmed unpredictably. Ventilation systems failed in synchronized patterns. One technician heard her own voice whispering back at her through the intercom, repeating a memory she had never shared. Another felt something brush her hand in an empty hallway. When she turned, there was nothing but frost on the wall, forming patterns identical to those carved in the cave. The creature never moved, but its influence deepened. The AI logs recorded data loops that had not been programmed. Algorithms began constructing their own variables, simulating what the creature might be, thinking. And when William reviewed the logs, he found a single word embedded in the code, over and over again: remember. The containment protocols remained intact. On paper, everything was stable, but in the hearts of those inside Vault 9, something had shifted. They weren't controlling this presence. They were being allowed to believe they could. Every scan, every sample, every whisper, it all felt orchestrated, as if the creature was conducting experimental research on them. Before leaving that night, Thorne stared through the glass one last time. The creature's eyes followed him, slowly, lovingly. Not hate, not malice, but recognition. And in that moment, he didn't feel like a scientist. He felt like a specimen. And as the door sealed behind him, he asked himself, what if this isn't its first visit to our world? The samples arrived in chilled containers, marked with more cautionary symbols than any biological threat William Thorne had ever encountered. Skin, tissue, hair, strands, a viscous secretion extracted from the base of the creature's spine. The team handled them with trembling fingers, despite the gloves, the suits, the protocols, because they knew instinctively this wasn't like anything they had seen before. Not a mutation, not an infection, something else entirely. Under the microscope, the cellular structure of the skin alone defied classification. Not just foreign, impossible. It refracted light internally, like crystal. The cells weren't bound by common membranes. They pulsed, flexed, and adapted depending on temperature, electromagnetic exposure, even the observer's presence. One biochemist whispered, "It's aware we're looking at it." And for the first time, William didn't dismiss such intuition as superstition. The DNA sequencing was worse or better, depending on your perspective. No match on Earth, no ancestral correlation. But what unsettled them more was how the DNA didn't finish. It spiraled, then looped, as if expecting a completion that hadn't yet occurred. It responded to stimuli, not biologically, but rhythmically. A living code in search of a response, or a host. Eliza led the analysis of the secretion, thick, dark, metallic smelling. It showed enzymatic behavior consistent with metabolic fuel, but not for feeding. It generated localized electromagnetic disruption when exposed to heat. In one test, the substance caused a lab rat to seize and enter a deep REM cycle, during which its brain activity resembled human dream states. When the rat awoke, it avoided its own reflection. The substance was quickly classified as a potential parasitic organism. But again, nothing behaved as expected. What haunted William was the contradiction. The creature appeared clinically malnourished, protruding ribs, sunken cheeks, thin limbs. And yet, when awake, it exhibited immense physical strength. During one muscle biopsy, its fibers recoiled despite chemical paralysis, curling, flexing, learning. It wasn't just surviving. It was adapting in real time. Every reading pointed toward two possibilities. Either this was a mutated biological entity with intelligence far beyond our own, or it was something else entirely. Not born, not evolved, but made, or worse, summoned. And if so, who made it? William thought of the symbols in the cave, the supernatural whispers, the old stories wrapped in Wendigo mythology. It all blurred together. The spiritual, the scientific, the unspoken. They dissected without harming, observed without questioning. But in quiet moments, alone in the lab, some researchers reported intrusive thoughts, images, feelings. One technician scratched symbols into her notebook she had never learned. Another awoke from a nap, claiming to have spoken with her deceased brother. "He told me to leave it alone," she whispered. "It knows I saw too much." The deeper they looked into the samples, the more the data seemed to watch them back. Algorithms glitched, files reorganized. Themselves. A set of digital slides began playing in reverse without any human input. They found one frame inserted among them. A photo of Thorn from his childhood. A picture he'd never uploaded, never shared. "It's pulling from us," Eliza said. And for the first time the lab grew quiet, not from fear but from realization. William requested a neurolinguist to examine the recorded susurros coming from the creature. Dr. Mara Ellison, a cognitive phoneticist, arrived 3 days later. After just 6 hours of exposure, she filed a report. In it, she wrote, "There is no syntax, no structure, no known human root, but it behaves like speech. It repeats, it evokes, it resonates with the inner ear." She didn't elaborate. That night, she locked herself in her room and whispered to herself in the dark until the guards broke the door down. Her words made no sense, but her tears did. Meanwhile, Eliza discovered that the secretion contained what she called reactive memory. When placed near a person for extended time, its structure changed, like it absorbed the emotional or neurological residue. Samples taken from different researchers displayed different behaviors. "It's not a parasite," she said. "It's a mirror, a biological one." This raised horrifying questions. Was the creature alone, or was it the host of something else? Something non-biological, something sentient, that could only manifest through organic design. William noted, "The body is the anchor, the voice is the signal. The purpose remains veiled." Further tests with animals were halted after a chimpanzee exposed to the aura of the creature began rocking, scratching its eyes, and vocalizing a call no primatologist had ever heard before. When translated phonetically, it resembled an Ojibwa term recorded in a 19th century manuscript, Ndawab, meaning, "I see it again." The military ordered the chimp euthanized. Eliza wept. Despite everything, the creature never moved. It never fought, never spoke in ways we understand. It only waited, patient, alert. It became clear. They hadn't captured it. They had been invited to participate in something. The experimental research wasn't being done on the creature. It was being done through it, on them. Thorne remembered a phrase he'd read long ago in an obscure volume on pre-colonial indigenous folklore. "When the snow listens, and the forest forgets your name, the hunger walks without feet." It had sounded poetic then. Now, it sounded like protocol. A coded warning lost in time. And the creature was the proof that someone, somewhere, had heard it before. He found himself talking to it, quietly, when no one watched. "What are you?" he whispered one night. And for a second, the whispering stopped. Not because it wanted to answer, but because it wanted to listen. Thorne felt the shift, the gaze, the cold, and the very real possibility that his question had been heard. And so he wrote. Not for the CDC, not for the military, but for himself. "This isn't an organism. It's a question wearing skin, and we are not the ones asking." It was supposed to be another observation session. Routine. Controlled. William Thorne stood once again in front of the reinforced glass of Containment Cell 7, clipboard in hand, data streaming beside him. The creature hadn't moved in days, and yet it felt more present than ever. The silence of the lab wasn't just silence. It was tension stretched thin, like skin over an open wound. Thorne noted the same. Things again. Posture unchanged, vitals stable, no external activity. But then, without transition, its eyes shifted. Slowly, like a clock hand in reverse. They locked onto him, no dramatic motion. Just an impossible awareness. As if Thorne had just stepped over an invisible line. A threshold. For the first time in his life, he felt studied. Not just looked at, but measured. From the inside out. The whispers resumed, but now they were different. No longer ambient, no longer disembodied. They had direction. They moved through the speaker system, triggering no commands, no interference. The sound system wasn't on, but still, the whispers came, deep, layered, rhythmic. They didn't just produce sound, they induced sensation. Cold behind the eyes, pressure in the lungs. A sensation of being submerged in memory. Technicians reported anomalies again. Monitors showed heartbeat spikes in staff members, synchronized with the whispers, even when they weren't near the cell. One guard experienced a full dissociative episode, claiming he saw 2 moons and his own future on the wall behind the containment glass. No drugs in his system, no sleep deprivation, just proximity. The creature wasn't just observing now, it was resonating. Thorne requested a moment alone with it. Against protocol, resubjected, but something about William's tone, the calm, the resolve, convinced him. The room was sealed. William stood alone, separated only by 3 layers of titanium and bulletproof glass. The creature didn't move, but its eyes, they didn't blink. He raised his hand, trembling. "What do you want?" he whispered. In response, the creature blinked. Once, slowly, and then came a sound, inside William's own skull. Not heard, not spoken, felt, like a chord struck in the bones. A message not in words, but in pressure. Not thought, but certainty. William dropped his clipboard. His vision blurred. He saw images, not his own. The Canadian wilderness, but before the snow. The forest alive, vibrant. And then, silence. Something had arrived, or awoken. He collapsed. When he woke, hours had passed. He was inside the med bay, saline drip in his arm. Eliza sat beside him, eyes wide with unspoken fear. "It scanned you," she said. "The EEG data shows mirrored brainwave activity. Like it was reflecting your consciousness. Like it took something." And yet, William felt no loss. Only that something had shifted inside him. Later, when he returned to the cell, the creature no longer watched him. It had turned its gaze upward, toward the ceiling, toward something beyond. William wrote in his journal, "We were never the observers. We are the experiment, and the hypothesis is still being tested." The next days brought deeper disturbances. The lab's AI assistant, Hermes, began producing unauthorized transcripts, fragments of sentences, some resembling indigenous dialects long lost, others pure gibberish. One entry simply repeated a phrase, "It remembers through us." No one could trace the origin. Hermes hadn't been connected to the audio feed. More troubling was the behavior of the staff. Dreams became communal. Several reported the same images, a circle of fire in a frozen forest, a humanoid entity kneeling in the center, whispering names into the dark, names that matched former patients, former test subjects, all deceased, but not forgotten. Psychological horror took hold, the kind that doesn't scream, but lingers, that rewrites what you believe about reality. And yourself. Eliza isolated a set of parasitic organisms embedded in one of the muscle samples. They weren't just living alongside the host, they were guiding it, genetically engineered, spiritually bonded. There was no dividing line anymore. The closer they looked, the more supernatural the biology became, as if life had been reverse-engineered from a dream. The temperature around the cell dropped steadily, not because of the environment, but because of the creature. It was drawing energy into itself, slowly, silently. Lights dimmed whenever it was near. Batteries lost charge, and the whispers, once erratic, had become a chant, repetitive, rhythmic, deliberate. William noted, "It's building toward something, a convergence." Then came the last test. They attempted to sedate it once more, to reduce its cognitive load for safer interaction. The moment the chemical entered the air system, the entire lab went black. Total power loss. Emergency protocols failed, but the doors remained locked. No one entered, no one left. Inside Cell 7, the creature simply looked at the camera and smiled, not with lips, with presence. Everyone in the facility reported feeling watched, even in isolation, especially in isolation. One by one, personnel began requesting reassignment. Others simply left without clearance. Some refused to speak of what they had felt in those final hours. Thorne stayed. He stayed because something inside him needed to understand, to complete the message, to meet the gaze of what lived beyond biology and nightmare. He no longer feared it. He no longer questioned its origin. He only asked, why us? And more urgently, why now? That night, the whispers stopped entirely. A silence so profound it felt like space itself was listening. The creature did not move, did not speak, but its eyes, ever patient, gleamed with something terrible and divine. William stood before it, no longer a scientist, no longer a skeptic, just a man who had seen beyond the veil. And what stared back was still deciding. So now you know. What they found wasn't a monster. It wasn't even a discovery. It was something ancient, something aware, and something that never wanted to be locked away. The creature remains in containment, but every system it touched, every person it looked at was changed. Because some things don't need to escape to reach you. Some things just need to be remembered. And maybe that's why you're here. If this story stirred something in you, a memory, a fear, a question you can't quite put into words, don't leave in silence. Tell us what you felt. Leave a comment below and share your experience. We read every one, and some of them. Stay with us. And please, don't forget to subscribe to The Other Side Speaks. Turn on all notifications so you don't miss what comes next. Because these stories aren't just stories. They're preparations for what's still out there. Watching. Waiting. The next video is already waiting on your screen. Click it. Keep going. The further you go, the more you'll understand why you were chosen to hear this. Until then, stay aware, stay quiet, and never look away for too long. Because when you do, it sees you.